In this tutorial, we will talk about factor by grouping. To factor by grouping, we're going to split the polynomial into separate terms inside the box. We're going to factor out a monomial from each binomial, each row in each column. And then the quantities on the side of the box are the actual factors. So let's go ahead and fill in our box. So we have x cubed, a positive 3x squared, negative 4x, and a negative 12. So if I'm looking at the first row, so these two, I'm looking at what's in common, and they both have an x squared in common. And then I'm going to look at the next row and see what they have in common, and they both can be divided by 4, and this negative sign makes this a negative 4. And then I'll look at this column and see what I can divide out. Well, I can divide x cubed and x. They have an x in common. And then I will go ahead and look at the last column, and I can divide all of that by 3, and this positive here says this is a positive 3. So factored form is x squared minus 4, which is this quantity here, and x plus 3, which is this quantity here. This is factored form. Let's do the same thing in letter B. We fill in 2x cubed, and we have a positive x squared, and a positive 8x, and a positive 4. So if we're going to look at the first row, what's in common? Well, we have x squared in common. And then we can look at the second row, and we can divide them all by 4, and this makes it a positive 4. And then we can look at this column right here, and we can divide each number by 2, and they both have x in common. And then if we look at our last column, we have x squared and positive 4. I can only divide them by 1, and because this is a positive, this is a positive. So then I get x squared plus 4 times 2x plus 1. And that is factored form. Letters C and D. I'm going to fill in x cubed minus 2x squared minus 9x plus 18. So our first row, we can factor out x squared. Our second row, they can be divided by 9, and because this is negative, that's negative. In our first column, we have an x in common. And then our final column, we can divide them both by 2, and because this is a negative, so is that. So x squared minus 9 is one factor, and x minus 2 is the other factor. So this is factored form. Letter D, if I'm looking at it, I'm thinking of what I did with factoring out a monomial. 12, 3, 24, and 6, I can divide them all by 3. So if I divide 12 by 3, I get 4x squared. If I divide 3 by 3, I get 1x. Negative 24 divided by 3 is negative 8x. And negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. So this 3 is a factor that we're going to put in our final answer. And then what's in parentheses are the values I'm going to put in the box. So I have 4x squared plus 1x minus 8x minus 2. And then I'm going to look at this first row, divide out an x. Second row, negative 8 and negative 2. So that's, I can divide them both by negative 2. And again, that's a negative because the 8 is negative. And then if I look at the column, I can divide by 4 and x, and then my last column, I can only divide by a 1, and because this is plus, it has to be plus. So my one quantity is x minus 2, and then my next quantity is 4x plus 1. That gives me what's in parentheses, but I also need to bring down the 3. So my final answer is 3 times x minus 2 times 4x plus 1.